The requirement of NRM2 and indeed other methods of measurement for walls or skins to be measured along their centre lines does cause some confusion among students learning the game for the first time. Hopefully this video will put to rest the confusion and show you how easy it really is. In nearly every case when looking at drawings we are given the internal dimensions. This is because in the commercial world renters and tenants value room sizes and indeed whole buildings by their gross internal floor area. Sometimes we do get external building and room sizes, so we have to be able to use both of these to calculate the centre lines. Most external load-bearing walls are what we call composite walls, i.e. they are made up in layers or skins. For a typical house external wall, there is a brickwork outer skin, then an air gap, and this is measurable because there is work required to form the gap or the cavity, and then an interior blockwork skin. Some walls have an air gap and an insulation layer. It is the centre lines of these skins that we need to calculate. Once we have the centre lines, we can multiply by the heights and obtain the areas of these skins. And this is how they are priced, by their square metre area. Let's have a look at this plan view. It's enlarged to make it easy to follow, made up with a composite wall and with internal dimensions of 2.680 metres by 1.860 metres. The internal girth, or the distance all the way around the interior, is therefore 2 by 2.680 plus 2 by 1.860, which gives us an inner girth of 9.080 metres. What we are required to calculate now is the distance all the way around the centre line of the blockwork, the cavity, and finally the outer brickwork skin. Let's examine the drawing. The green line is the distance around the inside of the room, referred to as the inner girth, which we have just calculated. The blue line is the distance around the centre line of the blockwork and referred to as the centre line of the inner blockwork skin. The black line is the distance around the centre line of the cavity and referred to as the centre line of the cavity. The red line is the distance around the centre line of the outer brickwork and referred to as the centre line of the brickwork outer skin. So, how do all these centre line lengths differ from each other? The differences in lengths are the different distances around each corner. Let's expand the inner girth to the centre line of the inner blockwork skin, cavity and brickwork outer skin. If there were no corners, the girths of these centre lines would all be the same. The difference in girths then is the extra distance around the corners, as can be seen in the animation. Okay, so now we know where the extra distances come from, how do we calculate what these distances are? To do this, we need to look carefully at our corner. We can easily calculate the length and width of each corner by knowing the widths of each skin. For blockwork it's 100 mm, for a cavity, in this case 50 mm, and for brickwork it's 102.5 mm. Next, let's work out the additional distance to add to the internal girth of the room of 9.080 metres to get the centre line girth of the inner blockwork skin. Each of the corner distances is half of the blockwork thickness, so the extra distance that needs adding onto the internal girth is 2 times a half times the blockwork thickness of 100 mm. As there are 4 corners to the room, the centre line girth of the blockwork would be 9.080, which is the internal girth, plus 4 times 2 times a half times 100, which equals 0.4, giving us 9.480. We write it this way because quantity surveying best practice insists we understand where numbers come from as well as their numerical value. So 4 times 2 times a half times 100 is telling us that there are 4 of something, each with 2 parts, with each part being a half of 100. This is very useful when we are checking quantities against the drawings. It would not be enough just to calculate the answer of 0.4 and then add to the internal girth. Once you've learned how to do this a few times, it does become second nature. Okay, now that we understand the procedure, let's use it to find the centerline girth of the cavity and finally the outer brickwork skin. For the centerline of the cavity, the distances around the corner are longer and made up from the blockwork dimensions and cavity dimensions. Therefore, the extra distance is 100, thickness of the blockwork, plus a half the cavity thickness of 50 millimeters, which gives us 125 millimeters. Therefore, the extra distance is 2 by 125, which equals 250 millimeters. As there are 4 corners, our calculations are 4 by 2 by 100 plus a half of 50, which gives us exactly 1 metre. Hopefully you are now getting the idea. So let's do the centre line of the outer brickwork skin, again made up of the dimensions of the blockwork, cavity and brickwork itself. Therefore, the extra distance is 100 millimeters, which is the blockwork thickness, plus 50 millimeters, which is the cavity thickness, plus a half brickwork thickness of 102.5 millimeters. So our calculations are written 4 by 2 by 100 plus 50 plus a half of 102.5, which gives us 1.610 meters. So our final calculations for centre lines for an internal girth of 9.080 are for blockwork 9.480, for the cavity 10.080 and finally for the brickwork 10.690. There can of course be instances where there are more than 4 corners, and the rule for these cases is to add together the outer corners and subtract the inner corners. In this example we have 5 outer corners and 1 inner corner, so the final number is 5 less 1, which equals 4. The extra 2 corners generated by the irregular shape cancel each other out, hence the need for the deduction. At the beginning of this video we stated that we are most likely to get internal dimensions to work from, but on occasion we might get external dimensions and that we need to be able to calculate centre lines from these two. So let's have a look at our previous floor plan, but this time with external dimensions, and see if we can work it all out. We need to look at our previous calculations for the girth calculations of blockwork, cavity and brickwork, as these don't change just because we have external dimensions to start with. The centerline girth of each should be exactly the same, so let's find out. The exterior girth is therefore 2 by 3.185 plus 2.365, which equals 11.100 meters. Starting with the inner blockwork skin, our calculations for its centre lines would be 4 by 2 by 102.5 plus 50 plus a half of 100, which equals 1.620. Deduct this from the outer girth and we get 9.480. For the cavity, our calculation for its centre line would be 4 by 2 by 102.5 plus a half of 50, which equals 1.020. Deduct this from the outer girth, we get 10.08 meters. For the outer brickwork skin, our calculation for its centre line would be 4 by 2 by a half of 102.5, which equals 0.410. Deduct this from the outer girth and we get 10.690. So how does this stack up with centerline calculations using the interior girth? So let's have a look. They are exactly the same. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether we are given interior or exterior girths to find the centerlines, it still works. I hope you found this video useful.